Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Michael Kelly, and joining us this evening from the Royal Australian Air Force is Sergeant Catherine Morris. Today, we remember and commemorate the Battle of Pozieres. On this day, 101 years ago, Australian soldiers entered the Allied offensive on the Somme battlefield in France for the first time. The British Army's losses on the Somme over the previous 3 weeks had been immense. Now it was the Australians' turn. On the 23rd of July 1916, the soldiers of the 1st Australian Division assaulted and captured the strongly fortified village of Pozieres. They held the position under heavy German artillery fire before being withdrawn 5 days later, having lost 5,300 men. 2 more Australian divisions were rotated through the battle in turn. Over the following 6 weeks, the Australians made 19 attacks on a narrow 1-mile front. They were subjected to an almost continuous German bombardment of ferocious intensity, greater than anything they had faced before. The constant rain of heavy artillery shells killed, buried and maimed soldiers, testing their reserves of courage and stretching their will to breaking point. Australia's official war correspondent, Charles Bean, witnessed the battle and referred to Pozieres as that insatiable factory of ghastly wounds, recording, "The men are simply turned in there as into some ghastly great mincing machine." On seeing the battered survivors of the 1st Division trudge back from Pozieres, Sergeant Edgar Rule of the 4th Division wrote, "Those who watched them will never forget it as long as they live. They looked like men who had been in hell. Almost without exception, each man looked drawn and haggard and so dazed that they appeared to be walking in a dream, and their eyes looked glassy and starey. I've never seen men so shaken up as these." The 2nd Australian Division relieved the 1st and spent the next 12 days assaulting the Pozieres Ridge in the area of a ruined windmill. On the 4th of August, they captured the Pozieres Heights, a key position commanding the battlefield, which the Germans defended ferociously. After days of relentless German shelling, Lieutenant Alec Rawes of the 23rd Battalion described the area as nothing but a churned mass of debris with bricks, stones and girders, and bodies pounded to nothing. All is buried and churned up again and buried again. Rawes wrote of his men and himself clinging to life under shell fire among the dead. "We are lousy, stinking, ragged, unshaven, sleepless. I have one puttee, a dead man's helmet, another dead man's gas mask protector, a dead man's bayonet. My tunic is rotten with other men's blood and partly splattered with a comrade's brains." The remnants of the exhausted 2nd Division were withdrawn after suffering more than 6,800 casualties. The 4th Australian Division was next sent in on the 6th of August, continuing the assault north along the ridge towards Moquet Farm. It lost almost 4,700 men before it was withdrawn less than 10 days later. The 3 divisions were then rotated once more through the human grindstone of the front line. The 1st Division returned on the 15th of August, having had been made up to 2/3 strength with reinforcements after earlier losses. It endured a further 2,650 casualties before being replaced by the 2nd Division a week later. The 2nd Division lost 1,300 men in 4 days. It was relieved by the 4th Division, which suffered 2,300 casualties before being relieved by the Canadian Corps on the 5th of September. The Australians had succeeded in advancing the British front line just over 1.5 miles at a terrible cost. Charles Bean later wrote in his official history of the war, "On that crowded mile of summit, the 3 Australian divisions engaged lost 23,000 officers and men in less than 7 weeks." The site of the ruined windmill, later purchased by the Australian War Memorial, marks a ridge more densely sown with Australian sacrifice than any other place on earth. Tonight we tell the story of just one of those thousands of Australians who died in the Battle of Pozieres, Lance Corporal Michael John O'Connell of the 10th Battalion. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During the ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths of floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lance Corporal Michael John O'Connell. Michael O'Connell was born on the 14th of August 1893 in Ninnis, South Australia, to James and Elizabeth O'Connell. He attended primary school in Port Pirie before going on to attend the School of Mines, also in Port Pirie. Following his father's untimely death, John's mother Elizabeth moved the family to Adelaide, where he gained employment as an apprentice cabinet maker at the Mordaunt Manufacturing Company. He also joined the 78th Infantry, Adelaide's Rifles Regiment, serving part-time until the First World War began. O'Connell enlisted for service in the Australian Imperial Forces at Oaklands on the 11th of December 1914. After initial training, he was allotted to the 3rd Reinforcements to the 10th Battalion. Along with the other men in his reinforcements draft, he was sent to Melbourne, where on the 19th of February 1915, he embarked upon the transport ship Runnig, bound for Egypt. O'Connell had a brief stay in Egypt, as the Gallipoli campaign had begun. The 10th Battalion had been amongst the first ashore and suffered heavy casualties. He arrived on Gallipoli on the 7th of May and immediately joined the 10th Battalion. He saw his first major action a few weeks later when the Ottoman forces launched a massive counterattack on the Australian line in an attempt to overwhelm the small beachhead. The Australians held firm, repulsing the Ottomans, who suffered heavy losses. In early July, the much-reduced 10th Battalion was given several days' rest on Imbros Island before returning to the battlefield. The battalion then spent the remainder of the campaign in positions around Silt Spur at the southern end of the Anzac perimeter. In late November, it was withdrawn to Lemnos, returning to Egypt at the end of December. Over the next several months, the battalion was able to rest, train, and take on new reinforcements. In late March, O'Connell was promoted to Lance Corporal, and days later, the battalion sailed for France. By late April, the battalion had been introduced to the Western Front in the nursery sector near Armentières. At the beginning of July, the men marched south to the Somme. A few weeks later, resting in a town of Harissat, O'Connell wrote what was very likely his last letter home. Dear mother, sisters, brothers, and Auntie Kate, as we are about to go into work that must be done, I want to ask you, if anything happens to me, not to worry. One thing you can say, that you lost one doing his little bit for a good cause. I'm willing and prepared to give my life. My health is good and my mind is clear. The 10th Battalion went into the Battle of Pozieres in the early hours of the 23rd of July. The battalion suffered heavy losses. Among the fallen was O'Connell, whose remains could not be located after the battle. He was 21 years old. His name is commemorated amongst the missing on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lance Corporal Michael John O'Connell, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you very much for visiting the Australian War Memorial today, and safe trip home. Thank you.